Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it?
That's what it is to be a slave.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman, and today we've got a nice Albinauric encyclopedia video for you guys. But before we get into identifying and explaining all the various subtypes of these fellas, we should probably get some background information out of the way first. So Albinaurics are artificial beings born from pools of silver, essentially silver-based and blooded homunculi. But where did they come from? In the Eternal Cities, a race of humans known as the Nox were known to experiment with silver to create silver tears, basically shiny silver slimes that were occasionally imbued with lightning. But they have another subvariant called the mimic tear. Now these things are deceptive. They look like regular old silver tears but can transform sometimes into silver NPC fighters with weapons and shields, and some of the more clever slimes are capable of transforming into a full-grown lesser giant, aka a troll. And I suppose this isn't really that surprising. The Nox were capable of creating all manner of silver life forms. Shit, they've even got silver vegetation. I imagine that came from some sort of rudimentary mimic tear or silver tear as well. And the mimic tears were originally created by the Nox in an attempt to give them a lord, one that would bring them salvation from the tyranny of the greater will and usher in their age of the night sky. Ultimately this failed, however, and their ruined civilizations are some of the coolest looking places in the game. The Nox even got one of their cities destroyed by an Astel for their meddling. Despite all these setbacks though, life still goes on for the Nox people, far out of sight from the prying eyes of the greater will. It's said they're still carrying out their experiments, awaiting their fabled lord. The Carian royal family of Liurnia, led by its powerful matriarch, the Full Moon Witch, either made contact with the Nox people or had some sort of pre-existing connection with them. The Carians themselves are a family that emerged from the astrologers of the mountaintops that came down and founded the famous Lucarian Academy, aka Dark Hogwarts. The noble house of Caria itself was established when the first of their line used the power of the Eldritch Moon to rise to the top of the academy as a governess and elevate their clan into nobility. Another anime I'd watch. Now sure, this doesn't really explain how Rennala had a connection with the Nox, and there really is no outright stated connection, but it's something that's fun to theorize on. You know, just how the Carians and the Nox encountered one another. Maybe Rennala was a champion selected by the moon god that the Nox worshipped, or maybe the moon led them to her. Either way, the specifics may not be clear, but there's a definite connection between the two factions, as in Liurnia, the land in which the Carians have settled is riddled with remnants of a Nox society. And several members of the Carian royal family also demonstrate knowledge of Nox history and technology. There's even some cultural overlap, what with both factions' ritualistic use of the night tears to repent for one's sins. And nearly every Carian we meet in the game has some sort of tie to the technological achievements of the Nox. You've got Iji with his Nox mirror helm, Celavis with his puppets, Ranni with her knowledge of the Eternal Cities, as well as the existence of the Fingerslayer blade, the overall constant use of silver throughout Carian imagery. Even Rennala's crown seems somewhat reminiscent of the pointed hats that the Nox tend to wear, or at least the women. The men are only allowed to wear a cloth on their head. But on top of that, the Nox and the Carians also seem to have a matriarchal type of hierarchy. So the Carians had an innate connection with the Nox through the moons and their love of silver. They share several of the same cultural rituals, and it's not hard to assume that the Albinaurics were created by the Carians from Nox science, who they would then employ as assistants. That's my takeaway at least. The Carians eventually used the knowledge they gained from the Nox to bring Albinaurics to the land, and the Carians were, if nothing else, an equal opportunities bunch. Everybody was treated more or less fairly. Queen Rennala even roped in some of the lesser giants into her cause and made them into Carian enchanted knights who fought side by side with their human counterparts. And the Albinaurics were seemingly no different. Several of them were trained as sorcerer's apprentice, and nearly all the females were given direwolves to assist with their movement when their legs began to fade. Direwolves were one of the many symbols of House Caria, and while the Albinaurics were treated fairly, they didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. There really wasn't many places they could go. These were silver-blooded beings whose lives were not granted to them by the grace of the Greater Will's order, but by the mad science of those who opposed it. They were composed of pure sentient silver, essentially in opposition to the gold of the Erd Tree. But none of that stopped them from serving their Carian lords rather well. Some of them were even made into apprentices of sorcery. And it wasn't as a joke as was the case with several of the demi-humans that were taught magic. and many would eventually find their way into the service of a demigod. Which demigod, you ask? Well, it depends on the Albinauric. They came in 2 different generations because the first gen possessed a rather short shelf life, or at the very least their legs certainly did. All first gen Albinaurics have the same fate. Their legs will fade and eventually they'll die. Obviously this was a design flaw that would need to be corrected. And the Carians did just that with their new Gen 2 series of Albinaurics. They were strikingly different from the previous Albinaurics. Frog-headed and incapable of speech as well as the other higher cognitive functions of the first gens, their legs, however, skinny as they were, would never fade. So it looks as though the Carians solved one problem and created another, or perhaps 2 others. These new Albinaurics were certainly durable, but they weren't very intelligent. In fact, unlike their first-gen cousins, they appear utterly incapable of casting a spell. They are, under the right circumstances, however, capable of using incantations, but that's only after they've had the effect of a demigod on them. So being servants and retainers of the Carian royal family, naturally they fought alongside their masters when the Academy eventually rebelled. They were often fielded against the Academy's sellsword armies. Many battles were fought before at least one Carian enchanted knight had enough of how the Albinaurics were being used. Now this knight, whose name was Loretta, may have even been an Albinauric herself, one can't be too sure. But she decided that the Albinaurics truly deserved a homeland, a promised land, if you will. But eventually she determined that the best bet at finding them a home lay in the lands of Miquella's Haligtree. All it would take was a little pledge of her eternal service to the slumbering demigod. Oh yeah, and of course a long and bloody journey. Now her exodus party mainly consisted of the deadly Albinauric women and the Carian direwolves that served as their legs, as well as a large group of second gens. There don't appear to have been any first gen males to have made the trip, only women. It almost seems as though the first gen males definitely expire quicker than the females, or at least they just look much older, and also weren't as good of fighters. The females seem to take after Liurnia and they even favor a bow like her. That combined with their deadly use of frost magic makes them a formidable force of warriors, regardless of the fact that they can't use their legs. But even with the large amount of second gens that they brought, it was still a very bloody journey, although they did make it. Now those that were too weak to be a part of this grand exodus stayed behind, remaining in service to their Carian lords, some as sorcerers. Others settled underneath the Moonlight Plateau and built themselves a hidden village until it was put to the spear by Gideon the All-Knowing. They were mostly massacred, but some survivors do remain. There also appears to have been none of the more durable Albinauric women residing in the village, or in Liurnia as a whole, aside from that corpse that can be found surrounded by second gens in the Academy Gate Town ruins. Liurnia's in Liurnia too, I guess, although she is sort of stuck on the side of a cliff. The Albinaurics village had a leader by the name of Albus, and when Loretta left with the rest of the Albinaurics, a piece of the medallion was entrusted to the frail old Albinauric that opened up access to the Promised Land itself. The idea of an Albinauric promised land was essentially a fleeting fantasy to these individuals in the village, and that piece of a medallion that they had sort of felt like their only piece of it, their only connection to the rest of their race, and this promised homeland that they would never see. But unfortunately for Albus and all the others who stayed behind, all this piece of a medallion would do was bring the village to ruin, as it happens to be the exact artifact that Gideon the All-Knowing had burned the village in search of. Talk about ill-starred. Their memento of a fabled home they would never see is what brought about their destruction, or at least their villages. But all was not lost. This medallion shard would also ironically, or rather paradoxically, be what led to the salvation of the Albinauric race as a whole. See, this medallion piece would end up being crucial to the young Albinauric woman Liurnia on her quest to retrieve the birthing droplet from Liurnia in order to bring it to Philia in the consecrated snowfield, tucked away in an old abandoned church called the Apostate Derelict. Of course, she would first need the assistance of a tarnish so they could retrieve the other half of the medallion that had been presumably entrusted by Miquella to the master of Castle Sol, which adds up, there's some Albinaurics there too. Either way, Liurnia's daring odyssey made it possible for more Albinaurics to be born, but what happened to the Albinaurics that first migrated to the consecrated snowfield? Well, it definitely wasn't the land of milk and honey or the land of sunshine and titties or really anything like what it was promised to be. Truly, they can't have found anything good in the lands of the Haligtree or the snowfield that surrounded it. The journey had been brutal and likely took a massive toll on the Exodus party, and not long after the Albinaurics made it to the Haligtree and began to settle did Miquella go missing. The slumbering Empyrean had been cut out from his Haligtree and kidnapped by his half-brother Mogh, the Lord of Blood. either willingly or unwillingly. I tend to veer towards unwillingly. Now, understandably, this outraged some of the second gens to the point where they went out searching for their lord, only to wind up in the willing service of Mogh, their lord's very kidnapper. The second gens certainly are an impressionable bunch, or maybe the sanguine nobles are like the righteous gemstones of preaching sermons, at both homunculus and tarnished alike. I think it's a definite possibility, but let's get on to the encyclopedia section of this video, now that we're done with that 10-minute long Albinauric history lesson. So let's start with the first gens, because the Carians sure did. Now, one thing that's fun to notice about all Gen 1s is that their legs are quite literally fading. You can probably most easily see this on the ones that Gideon hung up as decorations around the Albinauric village. But the first Gen 1 Albinaurics you're likely to encounter are the ones I like to refer to as the Elders. They seem to be just the stock garden variety, nothing special about them version of the male first gen Albinaurics. Our buddy Albus is one of these, and he's seemingly the village leader of the Albinauric village, and there's countless other ones who look identical to him running around the front of the village. I suppose running is probably the wrong turn of phrase. It's more like they're sort of crawling around, defensively attacking anything that approaches them because of what had just happened to their village. And you really can't blame them. I mean, take a walk through the village, you'll see silver corpses, silver blood everywhere. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of Albinaurics hung from trees, hung up as decorations, their fading legs on display for all to see. Basically, these are the Albinaurics with absolutely nothing special about them. And these guys have a subvariant in the coughing Albinauric that's found just below the village. These guys are unique in that they've been crawling around in the poison so long that they've become poison imbued. This does seem to come with some drawbacks, however, as they look like they're in pain as they're violently coughing up poison. And I can only assume they were created when several of the corpses were chucked off of the high-up Albinauric village into the poison swamp down below by the forces of our dear favorite war criminal Gideon the All-Knowing. The other alternative to their origin was that they fled the village while it was being attacked and had nowhere else to go but the poison swamp and sort of just became one with it. I tend to think they were just dumped there by the marauders, but either option is possible. Anyway though, these guys are covered in moss and rags and, as I said earlier, are constantly hacking up a poisonous mist, which is exactly what I look like after recording one of my outros. And to my knowledge, these guys are only found in that poison swamp outside the village and nowhere else, but correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Anyway though, a more common subvariant would have to be the sorcerer ones. I like to call these guys the Black Hoods because of their black hoods. Aside from the staff they carry, it's their only distinguishing trait that separates them from the other regular male first-gen Albinaurics. Yet another piece of apparel that the developers have seen fit to deny us, by the way. Now, these exceptional Albinaurics were trained in the magical arts by their Carian masters and generally fulfill a wide range of roles, generally as assistants. But nowadays, most of them just serve in a custodial capacity as the janitors of Carian Manor. Maybe they're in charge of feeding the pet crab. Anyway, though, true to their deceptive nature, these Albinaurics, the sorcerer ones, will play dead in an effort to ambush trespassers of the mansion, and they also appear to have placed magical Carian booby traps. They're basically just glorified groundskeepers or caretakers. Celovus' apprentice Pydia is one of these Albinaurics, and he's quite pathetic. His job is basically to keep the puppets clean, and they don't seem to like him very much because when Celovus is killed, they all kill Pydia. But anyway, several of them can be found at the Carian Manor. Pydia is actually one of these. And over at Volcano Manor, even Rykard kept a couple around, one of them serving as torture master in one of his hidden Inquisitor complexes. And sometimes they would be ordered to torture their own fellows, something that they surprisingly delighted in. But these sorcerers weren't all bad. One of them is seemingly leading an evacuation effort in the ruined Albinauric village, having rounded up what elders he can find and guided them to the bridge. Another one seemingly has guided a few to the other bridge. At least that's what I think they're doing, organizing a little evacuation effort. At first I thought the one with the large group near the Omunculi was about to stage an attack on the old horned boy and his dogs, before I realized that they're just sort of playing dead. So I assume that the sorcerer has instructed the other Albinaurics to play dead on the bridge, and I guess wait for the Omunculi to leave? The other sorcerer had more luck, having made it to the sunlight out of the shadow of the plateau that this village is built in. Although it looks like he only managed to get one or two of the elders out. So at the very least, these sorcerers at the village aren't as bad as the one in Volcano Manor who likes to torture his own kin. Now, speaking of torture, that sort of brings me to the next two subvariants of the male first-gen Albinauric, starting with the aptly named Dumpling Heads. These are extremely violent Albinaurics with bloated, hooded heads that behave similar to the headsuckers from Bloodborne. They were tortured to the point of insanity, presumably by other Albinaurics, and not only that, they've been experimented on to the point where they've mutated. They have monstrous maws full of rotten teeth, and they were presumably tortured for the pleasure of the torturer according to the description of the Black Dumpling Hood, and they use these teeth to full effect and with frightening ferocity, violently cannibalizing any who cross their path. These are definitely the most dangerous Albinaurics that I've mentioned so far, and probably one of the more dangerous out of all of the Albinaurics as a whole. Luckily though, they're sort of like glass cannons. As long as you don't get caught in a combo or they're grabbed, they're easy to take care of, usually 1 or 2 hits and down they go. They're only found at Volcano Manor, which is understandable given the nature of that place, and more curiously at Castle Sol with some other Albinaurics who are also, well, let's just say not in the best shape. Were they originally normal first-gen Albinaurics when they were sent out to Castle Sol, or were they already torture victims when Miquella decided to station them out there with a bunch of ghosts? It's sort of tough to say. The other torture victim themed Albinauric would be the ones I like to call the Screamers. Now these sad sacks of shit appear to be strapped to pillories. They can often be seen hanging from rafters at Castle Sol and Volcano Manor, awaiting the opportune moment to drop down on an unsuspecting madman. They possess the unique ability to let out a deafening screech that alerts other enemies of your presence, and the ones of Castle Sol in particular have a way of deceptively appearing to summon exile soldiers of various size that make up the garrison of the castle to their defense rather quickly, almost instantaneously. When I first saw this, I thought, oh shit, are they like sentient spirit calling bells? And then I started to realize that they aren't actually summoning them, they're just sort of calling them from different parts of the castle, you know, due to its extremely haunted nature. But they mainly fill a role of lookout and sentient alarm system. Now, I believe that was all of the male first-gen Albinaurics, so let's get over to the female first-gen Albinaurics, and they only come in really one subtype. And that would be the San from Princess Mononoke style versions that we're probably all familiar with at this point. The Albinauric wolfback archers, who occasionally aren't on the backs of their wolves. They're extremely deadly archers, and they ride wolves that they're also able to cast icy sorceries through. And there's something about that I think looks really cool. It's almost as if they skin change into their direwolf for a brief second to let out an icy breath. And like many of the archer-themed enemies in this game, their arrows do in fact follow you, so keep that in mind. The NPC Latenna is one of these, obviously, as is the large Albinauric woman who resides in the apostate derelict named Philia. She appears to possibly be the birthing mother. All of the first-gen Albinauric women appear to be made in her image. They even wear matching armor. I mean, they're essentially her mini-me's. And then there's Latenna's questline, which involves delivering a birthing droplet directly to Philia. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that she's the birthing mother. Shit, I wonder if she's the former rider of that Red Wolf of Radagon down in the snowfield. You know, the particularly powerful one that hides out in that blizzard? Because if Philia's legs failed, how the hell did she make it out to the snowfield in the first place? I'm gonna have to say it's at least somewhat a possibility. Anyway, these Albinauric warrior women are only found in the snowfield, with the exception of Latenna and that corpse in Liurnia, with the vast majority of them appearing to guard the entrance to Ordina, the ruins of an old liturgical town. A place that effectively served as a gateway to the Haligtree. And those that aren't guarding it on the outside are actually residing in it, serving alongside a tribe of Black Knife assassins as a sort of deterrent for any who dared to trespass into Miquella's lands, as this Ordina Evergel was the only way to truly access the Haligtree, which would mean that Mogh somehow bypassed this booby-trapped entrance, or perhaps found another way into the Haligtree. Honestly, that's a topic for another video that could be quite interesting. Anyway though, the Albinauric women who reside inside the Evergel possess glowing bows, and they're all strategically placed on rooftops in the perfect position to snipe you when you least expect it. It's truly a wonderful place. But these women do appear to possess some sort of symbiotic connection with their direwolves, and the loss of a mount can have a profound impact on the Albinauric rider. We see this firsthand with Latenna and Lobo. I really wish we could bury Latenna's ashes at the end of her quest over at the slumbering wolf shack with Lobo. Truly the ending she deserved. I mean, she saved her people. The least we could have done was bury her ashes alongside her wolf. But I think that's all of the different first-gen types of Albinauric. Let me know if I missed any in the comments. Let's move on to the frog-headed simpletons, the second gens. So the most common variant of the second gens we're just going to call the regulars. They're found in a massive number in Liurnia, often wielding clubs, crescent halberds, occasionally the shamshir, or a unique ripple blade made in honor of the silver birthing pools that spawn them. The ones granted this blade seem more attuned with the arcane than the others, as they appear capable of using the weapon as a catalyst of sorts, allowing them to cast an icy silvery breath, not unlike the icy breath that their older first-gen sisters used their wolves to cast. It almost looks like the eyes glow in a similar way as well. Anyway though, some wear rags, others dress like Shrek, and they generally are found wielding rudimentary shields, crafted from the water-damaged wood that Liurnia is full of. Not really dangerous at all by themselves, but much like the demi-humans, they can overwhelm people in greater numbers. And they do possess a few tricks up their sleeves. For example, they can hawk swamp loogies at you, and have mastered the cartwheel technique of the bone wheels from Dark Souls 1, something I would say the second gen Albinaurics have made into their signature move. Now, often leading the patrols of the regulars is a large reg. The large regs are bigger, shirtless Albinaurics that wield massive wooden clubs that double as hiking sticks. They often tend to be a little bit more alert than the smaller Albinaurics under their command, so don't let the big size fool you, they're quite perceptive. And the regs, both large and small, can be found all across Liurnia, with a few smalls having made it all the way down into the Mogh dynasty, where they congregate with some of their changed brethren. We'll be getting to those individuals last, as they're my favorites. But what about the second gens who made the journey to the consecrated snowfield? Well, these Albinaurics were lucky enough to almost reach the Halig tree, but winding up settling just outside of it, alongside their first-gen wolf-backed sisters. Now, these second-gen regs are unique in that they have eyes of unalloyed gold due to them having accepted their Lord and Savior Miquella into their hearts, and as a result possess some new tricks, such as the ability to cast Golden Order incantations that were invented by the slumbering demigod before he turned his back on the Golden Order due to its inability to cure his sister. And it's a bit of a paradox, the Albinaurics being able to cast these golden incantations, considering that in the eyes of the Erdtree, Albinaurics are little more than soulless mechanisms, impure and unworthy of the Erdtree's grace, but through Miquella, all things are possible. Now, these regs also retain their ability to do cartwheels and hawk up loogies of swamp, but they've definitely been uplifted by Miquella's terrifying power. And of course, there's also large golden-eyed regs. They have all the same abilities that their lesser variants carry, and their main job seems to be to lead patrols through the blizzard-covered snow, presumably still searching for Miquella. For some reason, I have like this Mandela effect thing where I remember seeing some of these golden-eyed ones having halos or something, but maybe that was just something my mind made up. Oh yeah, a couple things about these icy white Miquella Albinaurics I forgot to mention. So the bigger ones, while they do have the golden eyes, don't actually appear capable of casting any incantations. We know the smaller one can throw those Miquella discs like their Slave Knight Gale or something, but I always thought the big ones had some sort of hidden incantation up their sleeve. But if they do, I can't seem to get them to actually use it in combat. One thing I thought worth noting was that this smaller reg wielding the Ripple Blade seems to have fallen asleep in front of an Arteria leaf. And these are extremely rare plants or ingredients that are known to have a blood-stirring effect, and as a result they're used as ingredients in a couple different buffing perfumes, the Blood Boil aromatic and the Uplifting one. They're also the secret ingredient in cooking exalted flesh, a Badlands delicacy. But most importantly, they're associated with blood, and it made me think it had to be possible that Mogh might be spreading his influence in this way. Perhaps Mogh is using Miquella's dream abilities to recruit Albinaurics via their dreams. I think it's definitely a possibility given Miquella's alter ego Saint Trina's association with sleep. And it would indicate that Mogh never even needed to make direct contact with any of these Albinaurics to turn them to his side. Definitely a fun theory that I'll have to hone a bit. Anyway, let's get to the last subvariants of Albinaurics that we're going to talk about today. The red ones, who I've dubbed Mogh's Boys. Blood red, devil-horned Albinaurics who have the same gear as the regulars but possess some brutal new abilities due to an upgrade from the Formless Mother via Mogh's cursed blood. Basically their reward for throwing in their lots with the Lord of Blood.
Give me the blood, Lord, and let me get away!
These new abilities they received included a new and improved cartwheel technique, now with spikes. But not just any spikes, these were made from the new blood that they possessed. They can also violently fire these spikes out at will in an attack that looks just as painful to the caster as it does to anyone unlucky enough to get hit by it. They also now possess the ability to hide within pools of blood, a new skill that they use with frightening efficiency in that blood swamp down in the Mogh dynasty mausoleum, a trick they undoubtedly learned from the sanguine nobles. The crucible horns that have sprouted from these uplifted Albinaurics' heads is a clear sign that they now possess the infamous cess blood. They seem to be in the midst of a turf war with the heavily infected monstrous crows of the region. The crows presumably got down there from Caelid somehow. Maybe they just jumped off the cliff and eventually fell all the way down here. But feeding on all these infected corpses riddled with strange eggs has left the monstrous crows down here rather disfigured. They are not looking too good. And there still remains some evidence of this conflict with the collapsed Great Raven surrounded by several blood-red Albinaurics. The two groups seem to keep to their own respective sides of the blood swamp nowadays. The infected dogs appear to have remained neutral in this conflict, although they do possess the numbers to turn the tides. And again, it is just speculation that there was even a conflict in the first place. But the change in the bird seems to be rather involuntary, whereas with the Albinaurics, they chose to let the Lord of Blood into their hearts, so they're not necessarily infected. The dogs and birds only got that way presumably from eating the infected meat that's been left behind in this blood swamp. But anyway, the forces of Mogh have this area pretty tightly locked down, and a large group of Mogh's Albinaurics can be found either patrolling a tree or listening to the sermons of a sanguine noble right outside Mogh's bedchamber. And there's several other smaller groups as well, some camped out near tents, some sleeping on a cliffside along with their non-blood-red kinsmen. The entire region, with the exception of the Murder Crow's territory, is crawling with these Albinaurics. The smaller regs, that is. And it's worth noting that while they now bleed red, the ones using the Ripple Blade are still capable of using their Silver Mist attack, which shows us that they've still got some small connection to their roots. They haven't completely forgotten where they came from. And the larger horned regs are even more curious. Found only in the haunted woods leading up to Mogh's dynasty mausoleum, these towering crimson Albinaurics stand vigil. They of course retain all of the unique blood abilities that their lesser versions exhibit, but what makes them exceedingly dangerous is the ace they possess up their sleeves. See, much like the Tibia Mariner of the Altus Plateau or the mountaintops of giants, these larger red Albinaurics possess the unique ability to summon a giant skeletal Susanoo, or bone avatar type thing, basically a giant ghost skeleton that's capable of firing off a ghost flame hyper beam. The funniest part is how they summon this thing. It looks like they blow into their great curved club as if it's a horn. A ghost horn, if you will, that summons this giant skeleton from the nether. The skeleton's also capable of dropping hammer fists on you, so be careful. But funny enough, the Albinauric summoner is not immune to the skeleton's attacks, meaning you can use the skeleton to kill the summoner, and it's quite easy. It's pretty fun too. I mean, I understand why we didn't get any kind of giant skeleton summon, but it really would have been nice to see that Ghost Flame Hyper Beam attack as a spell, but who knows, maybe in the DLC. Now, it's tough to say why getting an upgrade from the Formless Mother would allow this ability to be used by the Albinaurics, but perhaps there's a connection between the Blood Star and the bird-themed death rites of old. Because all of the other new abilities, the Blood Spikes, the Blood Cartwheel, all make sense and are in line with their uplifting by the Lord of Blood. But summoning a giant spiritual skeleton, well, that's death magic. Presumably ancient death magic. So I think maybe there has to be some sort of connection there. But anyway, these uplifted blood-red Albinaurics can be found only at the Dynasty Mausoleum of Mogh, and right outside the portal that leads to it, guarding it perhaps, in the consecrated snowfield. Perhaps they were left behind by Mogh or a sanguine noble to recruit more Albinaurics to the cause, or to just simply guard the back door into Mogh's secret lair. Either way makes sense, honestly. It is interesting to note that there's this large population of Albinaurics who were originally silver-blooded, literally a stone's throw away from a still very active Eternal City full of the Nox, the very founders of the science that allowed the creation of the Albinaurics. But I think that's everything I wanted to cover about the Albinaurics. Let me know if I missed anything in the comments. I love reading your guys' insights. They've inspired more than a few videos around here. But as always, I hope you guys found the video at least somewhat amusing and informative, and if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like the videos, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. I also have a Ko-Fi or Coffee account if you feel like supporting the channel, and I always feel like an e-beggar when I say that. But anyways, enough of that. Let's have our outro and then the final thoughts, shall we? Alright, so the audio video is actually coming along nicely. I've said that before, but it's definitely in progress. Before that, however, I got this video that's on a Song of Ice and Fire lore about a really underrated, obscure group of knights. Probably not going to light the world on fire or anything, but it's something I just wanted to talk about. A nice little change of pace, if you will. But aside from those, I've got the other Elden Ring videos I've mentioned in the past, plus I'm almost ready to begin the weekly rant series where I just kind of rant with extremely minimal editing about a theory or a topic or something I find interesting. But again, I didn't want to start that until I'm confident that I could do it once a week. But yeah, I've got a couple smaller videos coming out after this, then the audio video should be done. A lot of good stuff coming up. Plus, as soon as that Fallout series comes out, I'm going to have to be prepared to eat some of my words if it does turn out bad, which I'm fully ready to do. But I'm still hopelessly optimistic on that front. Anyways, though, I will stop rambling and let you guys go. A lot of great stuff coming up, and until then, be safe and see ya.